Hi, I'm Marissa Fallon, Director of Advocacy at Parents Defending Education. Thank you so much for joining us. We know this is a really busy time of year, so we really appreciate the time that you're spending with us to help get your children and yourselves ready for the new school year. We know it's back to school time. I'm sure you've been very busy getting all your school supplies, and if you haven't yet, you're getting that list together and you're getting ready to head out and get everything that you need. In addition to the school supplies and the last minute items that you need for your children, we wanted to talk a little bit today about some responsibility that you have as a parent as you send your kids back to school. And that is knowing what your rights are so that when you send your children back to school, if you have questions and if things come up, we can give you some of the answers today about how to handle some of those issues. You can always reach out to us at info@defendinged.org if we don't answer your questions today, and we're happy to answer those questions in the future. We have an amazing group of experts here today to answer some questions and talk about what some of your parental rights are. We have Mailyn Salabarria, the Director of Community Engagement at Parents Defending Education. And we also have Scarlen Valderaz, Public School Advocacy Associate at Parents Defending Education. We're going to jump right in because we have a lot that we want to cover today. So Mailyn, welcome. We're going to start with you. Let's start with the first right that parents have, the right to opt out of invasive surveys and review curriculum. Where is that right documented for parents, and what does it say?
Yes, Marissa, thank you for having me and putting this together. Like you said, it's really important reminders that we all need to keep in mind now that we're gearing and getting ready to get back to school. When we talk about probably one of the most important rights in the sphere of education and parents and what happened with the kids in the school, we usually refer to it as PPRA, which is the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. This is a federal amendment that was passed in 1974, and it basically says that the parents have the legal right to review the curriculum and all the materials that their students are being taught and exposed to in school, that they also have the right to request that information from schools, whether it's elementary, junior high, high school, as long as it's a school that receives federal funding, has to abide by these recommendations or by these regulations. The PPRA also cover parents' rights to opt out, review, request from schools, things like curriculums, surveys, personal information or data, personal data that could potentially be sold or accessed by third parties, and physical examinations that the children might receive in a school. For example, one of the ones that we have been listening from parents all over the country a lot lately, it's what happens when they apply surveys to the students where they are asking questions that they believe might be, intrusive or not appropriate for the age or for the environment of the school. Under the PPRA protections, the parent has to provide written consent before any of these questions are being asked to their minor children in the school. Some of the topics that are covered under this requirement of having prior consent by the parents are questions about political affiliations, about mental health, about sexual behaviors or identities, income levels, unless it's for a specific application that has to do with some sort of financial aid. So these are important things that parents have to be in the lookout for, because sadly, a lot of these surveys and questionnaires are being applied to students in schools, and the parents are now being notified, and they let alone giving consent for that kind of questions to be asked. And the second portion that has to do with these federally protected rights of parents is that the option to opt out for those type of curriculums, surveys, questionnaires, or any type of activity that the parent doesn't agree with, or they feel that it doesn't align with their values as a family and things like that. Usually what we see is that the majority of the schools or the majority of the school districts provide parents with opt-out forms. Some do not have them. In those cases, I would refer any parent or family member that is watching our show today to go to our website, defendinged.org. We have a lot of links and information and resources, templates there, where if you want to opt out your child and your school district or your school don't have that form, you can use one of those templates and submit it on your own, and make sure that you make copies for the homeroom teacher teacher, that you submit them in the office as well, and everybody that needs to be kept in the loop with this information so the parents can exercise, their legal right to decide what kind of curriculum, what kind of information, and what kind of surveys or questionnaires their children are exposed to.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. One thing I wanted to touch on with that is it's my understanding from reading PPRA that if your child is not going to be participating in a survey or under one of these categories that you mentioned, you can request an alternate assignment for your child. So that's something, should you speak with the teacher beforehand and make sure that they received your opt-out and ask them what your child will be doing during that time?
Definitely, Marissa. I think that the open communication with the homeroom teacher, with any other teacher, depending on the grade, and even with the personnel that we have in the school office is really important. Because remember, these apply not only to questionnaire or surveys, but let's say, for example, that there is a specific part of the curriculum, something like the social emotional learning sessions or something like that, that a mom or a dad believe that their child needs to be using that time for something else, or they don't want it to do it. Then when they submit that request to the teacher and the school administration, then they can request an alternative activity. Like, for example, I'd rather have my third grader going to the library and doing reading enrichment or doing math intervention or some alternative academic activity that they can request to fill out that time in the schedule of the child.
That's such a great thing for parents to keep in mind is, remember to submit the opt-out form, which I know for parents, that's a lot too, because you have a lot going on when your kids go back to school. But to Mailyn's point, having the open communication with your school officials is so important. And we don't want our children, if they're opting out, for example, to feel like they're ostracized from what's going on at school, right? What's going on in the classroom. So I had heard parents tell me about a teacher having their child sit outside in the hallway alone during the time that these surveys are given. And the parent felt like that was almost a punishment for the child. So my recommendation was, we'll talk to the administration and see if you can send your child to the library, or if you can send your child someplace else where they won't feel as uncomfortable. And I have a really interesting story that a parent told me that when she first submitted an opt-out for her child, she was very concerned because at the very beginning of last year, there were only a few children who had submitted an opt-out because parents didn't really know about it. So once the children realized, oh, there were a couple of kids missing from the class, they went home and they talked to their parents about it. Their parents talked to other parents and realized, oh, why wasn't this, your child in the class? So by the next time they did the survey, for the first group of kids, they had just sent them to the library. There were maybe like 5 of them. They were allowed to go to the library. But by the time they had the second survey, so many parents had filled out an opt-out that they had to move them to the gym. So all the kids were there in the gym. So it really does, it's kind of contagious. Once a few kids start doing it, then more and more parents will start doing their opt-out. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as well.
Yes.
So thank you, Mailyn. That was great. Scarlen, let's move on to the second right that parents have. It's the right to review, amongst other things, your child's official student record. Can you tell us a little bit about what FERPA is and what rights that gives a parent?
Yeah, so FERPA, also known as the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, is a federal law that states that parents have the right to review the students' educational records. Parents also have the right to amend their students' educational records, and parents also have the right to have control over some personally identifiable information from their student. So this is important to know because when our children are at school, we're away from them for a few hours, and we don't really know what happens all the time. And sometimes, stories get a little they get a little out of hand, or we don't get all of the full information. And at any time that your child gets disciplined, or if, let's say, for example, they've had bad attendance records, that all goes into their educational records. So it's good to know what's on there. And if you need to have something removed, then we get it removed. Or if we need to gain control back over who has access to our child's records, then that's important to note too. You can go ahead and request some school health records as long as your child is underage. And of course, that might differ from school district to school district. So I would encourage that you ask your principal, ask your superintendent, ask your school board to see what policies they have regarding that student health information. And also, one other thing to check is, does your school have a policy saying it will hide transgender status? What we've seen quite a bit, unfortunately, with schools is that they do have policies where you don't have to tell the parent if the child is changing genders, and that information isn't always put into the educational record. So be sure to find out if your school district has a policy about that. It's pretty important to know. And what can parents do about this? Well, they can make an appointment with the school principal to get their child's educational record on hand. And if you aren't able to, always make sure to CC your school superintendent and sometimes even the school board if it's necessary. And if push comes to shove, you can always go ahead and file a complaint with the Department of Education. It's pretty simple to do.
Mm-hmm. I found something else really interesting that I didn't know that I recently learned about, is that if you request a FERPA hearing, meaning that you've noticed a FERPA violation and you would like to address it, the school is required in a certain time period to actually have a formal hearing for you, an in-person hearing. So I thought that was interesting that that's another tool. You can file a complaint, but maybe before you file the complaint, you might want to give the school the benefit of the doubt, because maybe something got missed. Maybe when they were uploading data, something happened. So that's another thing that you have in your toolbox, is requesting a FERPA hearing. Another thing to be aware of as it relates to FERPA. So FERPA's real purpose, as Scarlen stated, it's a federal law, and FERPA's real purpose is to provide transparency, right, to parents. So every student has an official student record, and that student record is kept at the school. And that has things like disciplinary infractions that may have happened. It has things like your child's transcript. It has a lot of important information, and it's kind of the official record that follows your child from kindergarten until they graduate. And schools actually have to keep those records at the base school for 5 years after your child graduates. Then after that, they have to move it over to central storage. So they have to hold on to those records for quite some time. So what some schools are misinterpreting FERPA. And for example, there was the Columbus City Schools in Columbus, Ohio, and they were working with an organization, and that organization, as a consultant, was telling them that under FERPA, transgender students have the right to keep their records secret and in a secret file away from their parents' viewing abilities. And I think we're going to see more and more of those issues coming to the forefront, because that is not what FERPA says. FERPA doesn't mention anything about that. FERPA is really a federal law that provides transparency to parents. So we want to make sure that if a school uses FERPA in telling you that you can't see certain records, or is even keeping a separate file on your student, that's really a violation of FERPA. And it's a violation. It's also not in the spirit of FERPA. So that's something you would want to ask your school about. If they say something like that to you, my recommendation to parents about that and anything is that you ask for documentation, and you ask them exactly where does it say that. I have a copy of FERPA and I don't see that mentioned. Maybe I missed it. Can you show me where that is? So I would just recommend, we don't want FERPA to be used against parents incorrectly by schools. So if you get pushback on that front, I recommend that you ask for proof in writing to see the document that the school's referring to. So that's a great tool for parents. So thank you so much for that, Scarlen. The next topic I want to talk about, Mailyn, coming back to you, is let's move on to a third right that parents have. And this is a big one. It's free speech, and to ask questions of your school, your teacher, your administrators, and your school board. So can you tell us, where does that right come from?
Well, this is kind of like the basics of the foundation of who we are as a nation, as society, and it's based on the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. As many of our parents or viewers might know, it's our constitutionally protected right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and one important one that has a huge application in the sphere of public schools and parents getting involved is the right to petition the government, because school boards are elected officials that are representative of the local government at the level of a school and school districts. So basically, the way that this applies in the real life of parents and students in public schools is that, number one, a student does not surrender their First Amendment right when they walk into the school building. There are some regulations, some leeway in a sense that school districts have to, put some restrictions on it that has to do with discipline and with the operation of the school per se. But in general, First Amendment and free speech rights do not get checked out at the school door when the child enters the building. The other important one, and this one has more to do with parents, is the right to petition the government. Is that the parents have the free speech rights to ask questions about accountability, about school operations, about any topic that falls under free speech and First Amendment rights and public records. They have the right to request and ask questions and, bring those topics and those conversations with principals, with school district staff, in the school boards. And again, it basically falls under the right to petition your government and their representative, in these cases, under the particular field of the school district and the school board. There are three important parts that parents need to keep in mind when we're talking about having freedom of speech for your student and for you as a parent in this realm of the public school. Number one is that the First Amendment covers prohibited speech. As I was saying before, schools cannot prohibit speech of any type unless it's something that is crucially related to discipline and the operation of the school. And that's the end of it. The second part, which is one that we are listening and hearing stories from parents and students all over the country a lot lately, has to do with compelled speech. It basically means that school district cannot compel or force a student speech on any topic at all, none. The clear example that we're listening the most, Marissa, with parents and education advocates that we are in contact with, is the example of trying to make it mandatory for students or compelling students to use preferred pronouns. That is unconstitutional, and no school, no teacher, nor administrator can do that to any student or any parent. Another example, it's also some schools that have been trying to implement or write policies where they are trying to compel or force a student to affirm anything that has to do with gender ideology, especially if they have, a very strong religious or philosophical opposition to it. So these are kind of like two of the most common examples of compelled speech that we have been listening in experiences from parents. And then the number three, and it's also really, really important, it has to do with the First Amendment rights covering retaliation. This basically means that teachers, school employees, school district representative, administrators, school board members, they cannot retaliate against a student or a parent that is exercising their First Amendment rights. That means that, and we have seen in the news, and we have talked to parents and families about examples like this, and this applies whether it's inside the school or outside the school. So basically, a school district or a school in particular cannot police the free speech of a student, whether it's inside the school or outside the school, except those two clear examples that we discussed before that had to do with discipline and the effective operation of the school on a daily basis. So I think that that's kind of like what encompasses our first speech protections that are as the way that they are reflected in the spirit of the Constitution. And it's something really important, Marissa, for parents to keep in mind, because the more parent gets involved, both communicating directly with their teachers and their schools and speaking into their school boards, the more pushback they might receive, the more attempts to compel the speech, to cut their mics, to, all these techniques that we have seen happening everywhere. So it's really important that parents and their students are both informed and educated, which are their rights, which are the very specific limitations that a school districts can place in their free speech, and which are the things that they cannot legally do at all. So this is like a really important reminder for us to keep in mind now that we are getting, back into the school year routine.
I think that's great. That's such a wonderful explanation. So easy to understand. So thank you for breaking it down that way. I think one thing that we've really been seeing on the rise in so many of our school districts across the country is this idea of this new system that schools are implementing, this bias reporting system. So with the bias reporting system, I think it's really good to think of that in terms of what you just explained under the First Amendment, because what a lot of schools are trying to do is they're really trying to monitor and compel and silence certain types of student speech inside and outside the classroom. So they have a secret tip line, if you will, or reporting mechanism where if someone says something that a child doesn't like, or a teacher overhears something, or somebody else in the school, or even a parent of a student at the school, they can, in many of these districts, submit a complaint, essentially, which will then be researched to see what the child said, what kind of punishment or what type of discipline they're going to have. So that's really something to keep in mind. I think we're going to see a lot of First Amendment lawsuits as these bias reporting systems start to roll out, because they really seem like they're unconstitutional. So we'll see how that plays out, but parents should be aware of that, because a lot of these systems are going to be kicking off at the same time that our kids go back to school. So Scarlen, what can parents do if they run up against some of these First Amendment free speech violations happening at their schools?
Yeah, well, Marissa, there's so many things that a parent can do. So one really popular one right now is speaking up at your school board meetings and PTA meetings. We can also help if you don't know who your school board members are or who your PTA is. We can help you connect with parent groups or parents in your area that may know what is going on within the school system and how to get a hold of these people. Joining a parent group and getting to know like-minded parents. I know that we're all really busy and it's hard to form these relationships with other people, but right now it's super important that we do get along and find other like-minded parents so we don't feel alone, because a lot of the times we can feel really alone during all this craziness happening in schools. You can also review your school's student rights and responsibilities, the code of conduct. That way, if something happens at school as far as discipline goes, you know exactly how it's going to be handled. And if it's not handled in that manner, then you know that you can bring the code of conduct and ask them to follow it. Don't just sign stuff without reading it. I know that when we register our children to school, there's big long lines, and there's other things that we have to do that are far more important. And sometimes they just make it really easy, where they give you an iPad or something to register, and you don't really want to read, or you don't really read. So, but it's important that we do read it so we know what we're signing up for. If there's anything in your student's handbook that doesn't make sense to you, ask questions, and don't be afraid to not sign it until you get those questions asked. And of course, you can always go onto our website, defendinged.org, to get more resources as well.
Those are great tips. Thank you so much. I think what I've heard from a lot of parents too is different schools handle the school rights and responsibilities booklet differently. For some, when you sign the booklet, you're really signing that you agree to everything in the booklet. And some parents have had issue with that and maybe pulled out certain things that they want to talk to their school about. And for some districts, when you're signing, you're just signing that you received a copy of the student rights and responsibilities, or whatever they call it in your district. So that's a good thing to kind of be aware of. To Scarlen's point, when you're signing something, what exactly are you signing? Sometimes you can have an issue with your child being able to check books out of the library, or maybe get their school issued laptop or something. If you haven't submitted that and you haven't signed yet, usually it's electronically. So that's just something to keep in mind. If anything pops up that you're concerned about, bring it to your principal's attention. And if necessary, you can talk to a school board member, or you can talk to your superintendent about it. So I think we covered some really important things as far as parental rights. The PPRA is a huge one. And what most parents interact with that is really the opt-out forms. And I know Mailyn has had a lot of experience talking to parents whose schools are just refusing to give the parent the opt-out form. So that is a federal law. If it covers any of those categories that Mailyn discussed, and those are on our website, it's a federal law that you'd be allowed to opt out. So that's a really good thing to keep in mind. The FERPA, which Scarlen talked about, I have a lot of parents who I talked to over the summer who were using the summertime to actually go in and look at their students' physical record. So you can make an appointment anytime you want to go into your school and sit down and actually look at your student's file. And that's a good thing to do because it's not a significant burden on the school district. And you can give them ample time within a reasonable, I think it's within 2 weeks or something, they have access. One thing I learned that was really interesting is if you have a child who has an IEP, in many states, and every states are a little different, they actually have to give you a physical copy and make a copy. So an individual education plan. So if your child has an individual education plan, the schools often have to actually give you a physical copy of your file. So that's really good to know. So FERPA is really helpful. Knowing about your First Amendment rights is huge. So that's a great explanation. So thank you so much, Mailyn. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, we have all these rights that parents, have that you're going to be exercising. One thing I really wanted to talk about that's kind of a fun thing as we head back to school is volunteering. So volunteering is an amazing way to get into your child's school, get to know the teachers and the administrators, get to see your child in action, which I think we all just love to see our kids with their little friends at school, and also an opportunity to meet your child's friends. Because if your child goes to a charter school or a private school or a school that for whatever reason is not close to your home, if it's a public school, it might not be your local community public school, you don't really have a lot of opportunities to meet your child's friends, get to know them. And I can definitely guarantee from my own personal experience that when you are in the hallway and when you are volunteering and when you see your child's face absolutely light up when they see, I mean, they're just so thrilled to have their parents in the school. Maybe not so much when they get to high school, but definitely when they're younger, they love it. So let's talk a little bit about volunteering. It's not the way that it used to be years and years ago, when you would just show up at school and they'd be happy to see you with, open doors. Or you could call them and say, oh, I want to come in tomorrow. And I'm going to come in tomorrow and volunteer and help with the class cookie bake that they're doing. Now, most schools for security reasons have a little bit more of a process involved with becoming a volunteer. So some schools have a background check requirement. Some schools have certain types of training that you have to do to be able to be a volunteer. So it's not as easy as I want to volunteer on my child's field trip next week. So get to know what your school's policy is. We have this great checklist. It's also available on our website. You can look on your school's website to see what they say about volunteering. Find out what the process is, because it can take, a week or a couple weeks, depending upon the size of your district and their requirements. You can find out, how do you become a room parent? Usually that happens on your back to school night, but sometimes that happens beforehand, and maybe you can't go to the back to school night. Another way that you can get involved is if you don't have time to get involved during the school day, or you are maybe more interested in policy or something like that as it relates to your district. Parents don't realize how many school committees there are, and those are usually run under the umbrella of your school board. And they have school committees on things like family life curriculum. They have things like school safety. They have things like infrastructure or facilities. If you're, really interested in, the football program or grass turf or something like that. There's basically a committee for any parent who's interested. They have an audit committee. They have so many different types of committees. So if you're interested in getting involved on a more policy level, then definitely reach out to your school board members and find out what types of committees are available. How you get your name on the list to be considered for one of those committees. Also think about what kind of volunteer opportunities there are in your child's school. Schools love to have help in the front office. They love to have help in the art room. Teachers always need help making photocopies and providing an extra set of hands in the classroom. So you can work in the school library. I mean, there's so many different ways to get involved. So think about what really appeals to you and what level of commitment you're willing to make or want to make, because the schools are more than happy to have you whatever amount of time you want to provide, they're absolutely thrilled to have you do that. And it's a great way to really feel like you're part of the community and to see your kids. So it's a really fun thing to do. So I encourage everybody to look into what are the volunteer requirements and then think about some things that you can do. So we covered a lot of topics today. I really appreciate your time, Mailyn, Scarlen. I think this is so great. I learned a lot, so I have a lot of takeaways that I'll be using in 2 weeks when my child goes back to school. It's really up to you parents to be informed about what is going on in your child's school, what your rights are as a parent, and how to exercise those rights, and what to do if you don't feel like your voice is heard when you're attempting to exercise your rights. We always recommend that parents document everything because it just makes it easier when you're kind of trying to navigate some of these different issues. But we really appreciate the time that all of you very, very busy parents, especially this time of year, and caregivers have given to listen to us tonight. Please follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We are very interested in how your child's experience going back to school is. And I would just love to hear final thoughts from Mailyn and Scarlen. What final thoughts would you like to impart upon parents as they get ready to send their kids back to school? Mailyn, what do you have to say to our parents?
Well, I would think that just the usual reminder, Marissa, is that a parent that is empowered, that has, sought educating himself or herself into what's going on in the school, in the district, a parent that is involved is a crucial person to guarantee the success of the kids in the school. I wanted to wrap up back a little bit in what you were saying about volunteering, because it's not only like this happy, positive experience of bonding and connection that we're going to have with our kids, but it's also think about our teachers. We have so many wonderful educators that are working so hard to educate our kids. And I think that letting them know and showing them that they can rely on us for any help that they need in the classroom is really important. Again, like you were saying, adapting to what kind of time do you have. You can either do it in your classroom, in your school, or at the district level for those parents that are a little bit more seasoned in their advocacy efforts in their school district and their communities. I would highly recommend they look for district accountability committees, the committees that have to do with the decision making related to curriculum decisions, to curriculum choices that are adopted at different grade levels, diversity committees, anything that had to do with the budget process and proposals for those parents that feel that that's the part where they're going to be more efficient. I think that would be very helpful, because again, the decisions that are being made at the district level impact our children too. So the more involved that we are, the better. So I would highly recommend looking into whatever is your time and then picking one of those choices to be able to get involved.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Scarlen, what are your final thoughts for our parents?
I would say relationship building is super important. Build relationships where you can. Build relationships with your school principal, with the other administrators, with the school secretary, with the teachers, even with the school janitors, the lunch ladies, and other parents as well. The more relationships that you can build within your child's school, the more welcome you'll feel and the more welcome you'll be at your child's school.
That's great. Thank you so much. So again, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, to find out what the latest is at defendinged.org, our website. If you have any information you want to share with us about how your child's experience is going back to school, any questions, feel free to send us your questions at info@defendinged.org. I think not only do our children now have their checklist of things that they need to do, but we also have a wonderful checklist ourselves. This is also available on our website, and I highly recommend you print it out, stick it on your fridge, and you can just, make sure you are remembering to do all these things. We all get so busy when it's back to school time, but this is a great checklist that talks about things like reviewing the handbook that we talked about, your opt-out forms that we spoke about, getting familiar with FERPA, reviewing the PPRA, finding a parent group, which is so important, as Scarlen mentioned, finding a network of parents at your school and in your community is so important.
Mm-hmm.
We have parent groups on our website, defendinged.org, and you can email us if you're looking for a parent group. Finding out what the discipline policy in your school is, finding out how to file a Freedom of Information Act request if you need to, and again, volunteering and getting into those classrooms. So thank you so much. Please be aware. Your assignment is to please be aware of what's going on in your children's school. Hopefully we provided you some good, helpful information today to make that easier for you. So thank you so much for spending time with us. Good luck this school year, and we can't wait to hear how everything's going. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.